Welcome to another episode of One on One with Mitch Lafon. Joining me this week, two rock goddesses, LITA Ford talking about her new album, TIME CAPSULE, and former Michael Jackson guitarist Jennifer Batten talking about the Ultimate Guitar Experience Tour with former Danger Danger guitarist Andy Timmons and former Scorpions guitarist Uli John Roth. Great chat with both ladies, and hey, away we go. Here is the one, the only, the always affable LITA Ford. We are speaking with LITA Ford. Good day, LITA. Always,
Hi, thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you. The last time that I actually saw you, in fact, was at Heavy Montreal last year. You had a great performance.
Oh yeah, that was a blast.
Yeah, great.
Good show.
Yeah, that was a great show. So let's talk about the new album, Time Capsule. It seems to be sort of a collection of songs that you've had over the years. Is that about right?
It is. It's a collection of songs that I've had through the 80s. Collection of different artists that performed on these songs, and they're great songs. So I just I wanted to release them, and I wanted to share them with the fans because I think they're definitely worthy of it. They sound so good. They rock. The celebrities that are on it, just people need to hear them.
Yeah, I agree. Let me go specifically to the song Rotten to the Core. You have Gene Simmons of Kiss playing bass on it, and Bruce Kulick, who is ex-Kiss, but I think I would argue should be in Kiss. Gene Simmons had a demo going back to the late 70s called Rotten to the Core. There are some elements in the songs that are the same. Is that a song that Gene wrote and then sold to you or gave to you?
He didn't finish the lyrics. He had the bass parts and the rhythm, some rhythm guitar ideas, and then I finished the rest. Yeah, I didn't know that people knew about it. He told me it was on at the time he had told me that he was just starting to write it, and then when I circled back to him, here we are, how many decades later, I asked him if we could use the song, and he said, "What song?" He didn't remember. So we dug up Bruce's 4-track cassette, whatever it is, player, and he found a version of Rotten to the Core that they had started. So I finished it.
Right. And should he ever forget again, luckily we have YouTube to remind us of all the demos that people have made over the years.
Is that where you heard it, on YouTube?
Yeah, there's a bunch of versions of it on YouTube. There's a good dozen versions of, and they all sound somewhat a little bit different progressions on it. So, that internet, right?
Oh God, I had no idea.
But talk to me about working with some of the guests you have on here. And so since we mentioned Gene, let's start with Gene. You've had a relationship going back with the band for 20, 30 years now. You even had Eric Singer in your band for a while. What was it like getting Gene in the studio and getting him to work on this track? And what does he mean to you just as a person?
Gene, I've always loved Gene. He's just... the Runaways grew up with Kiss. We were all hanging out together and in the music industry together at a very young age. So Gene's like my big brother. Bruce I didn't know so well, but Gene, like I said, he's just like my big brother.
Right.
Good guy.
And of course, your manager at the time, King Fowley, wrote a song for them, King of the Nighttime World.
Yes, he did.
The other track that's interesting to me is Killing Kind, where you have Dave Navarro and Robin Zander and, of course, Rick Nielsen, those two from Cheap Trick. Talk to me about getting the band Cheap Trick on this album.
Well, again, Cheap Trick and the Runaways were buddies growing up. Cheap Trick actually used to open for the Runaways on live shows, and also Tom Petty. So it was a 3-bill lineup with the Runaways headlining. It was quite fun. But at the time they were in town in Los Angeles, and we were just hanging out, messing around in the studio, and they ended up singing backing vocals on this song that we had no idea what we were going to do with it. I mean, we weren't going to release it as a master, but after the record label had caught wind of this song and thought that the Robb brothers should produce the next album, and that they wanted to use that song on the next album. But the Robb brothers did not put Dave Navarro on it. They did not use the Cheap Trick guys, and pretty much did a completely different version of the song that does not do the song justice. And even more so, why I wanted people to hear this version of the song, because this song kicks ass.
Yeah, it really does.
Thanks.
Talk to me also about making new music, because you have an established brand, if I can use the word. You can go out to concert venues and say, Lita Ford playing tonight, and do all the hits, do Back in the Cave and all that stuff, and fans would show up. Why put yourself through the process of creating new music?
What do you mean, put myself through?
Well, why bother making a new album when you can just go out there and play the shows and do all the greatest hits, Kiss Me Deadly and all that? Why is it important for you to come up with 10 new songs?
Well, these songs aren't new. I've had them in my closet since the 80s. But it was just as easy to put them together and transfer them from analog to digital and remix them. It really was no sweat. We didn't change anything. We didn't change one note. We didn't go in and start fixing things and overdubbing things. We just left it as they were. And I think it's cool for the fans. The fans want to hear stuff too. That they want to hear new material. They get to keep the old stuff, but it's always good to have new stuff too. We're always making new songs, writing new songs. We're writing the next album now for 2017.
Great.
So it's what we do.
Right. And I guess the point I was just trying to get at is that the marketplace has become sort of difficult for new music. And when you have an established name like Kiss, like Cheap Trick, like Lita Ford, you can just head over to a club, put the name up on the marquee, sell some tickets, and still have a great show, and still have the fans there, and you don't have,
see what you're saying.
Right, and you don't sort of have to go through, and maybe the word is wrong, but you don't have to go through the hassle of coming up with songs and getting that's sort of what I was getting to. If we can, let's talk about the book.
Sure.
You decided to. In fact, what made you want to write this book? Living Like a Runaway.
Well, it was when I came out of a 16-year marriage, and I'm sitting in this little apartment, just thinking, I've got to write a book on my life. My life is just, I've been through so much. I started reminiscing back to the early days in the Runaways and growing up. I miss my parents because I was an only child. Miss my mother and father, and the reminiscing of I had to reminisce because during my marriage I had been stripped of my identity, if that makes any sense, by a controlling brainwashing ex-husband. And I literally had to sit, if you read the book, you'll know
Right.
that I had to sit and revisit my videos. I had to revisit, and thank God for the internet that it was there, revisit old songs and clothes and moves on stage, guitars, things like that I had forgotten. I just didn't know who I was after 16 years of being brainwashed. And so I forgot the question now.
Right. Well, so let's move on there, because you mentioned the marriage and the ex-husband. In the book itself, though, you don't really deal with it. You sort of...
No, because it's nasty. It's
Right.
very, very nasty, and I don't want to go there.
And I have to say, I applaud you for that, because there are children involved, and I don't think that they need to have that made public, if I may offer my opinion on that.
Yeah, definitely.
You know,
Absolutely. No.
I just think of my two kids. I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, and we've been married for 15 years, and should it go sideways, I just don't think they'd want to open the New York Post and see Daddy says this about Mommy, or vice versa. So, you know how that is.
Right. No, instead I get a list of people I've slept with.
Well, in fact, yeah, you did put out a list, and
I didn't put out a list. They did.
The New York Post.
Yes. Of course, they go straight for it. It's like, really, thanks, guys. We were young, rebellious, just coming out of our teens. Of course, we're in the music world, music industry. I'm not a saint, and neither were they.
Can imagine. Well, so let me ask you then the other side of that, though, because I do have the New York Post article in front of me. Did that cause any consternation with the people that were mentioned? Did you get any feedback? Because there were some things said, particularly about Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath, that, I'm sure he'd rather not have been said. Does that cause any kind of concern, or are you scared when you decide to write that?
No, because we called him and we gave him the opportunity to respond to our call, and he didn't. He chose not to call me back. Was I scared to write it? No. I mean, people are abused at times. Women, men, even men get abused by their relationships, and I was devastated to find out that my hero was one of them. And even more so, it was somebody that I'd looked up to for years and years and years. And this guy turns out to be abusive. And I was devastated. I mean, I was really sick over it. I went out and got that tattoo of the dragon on my shoulder, and I just became really rebellious. And I thought, that's not what superheroes are supposed to be like. I was engaged to be married to him, and I couldn't, of course, couldn't go through with it. And I was devastated. He hurt me, and I thought, to put it in the press, why not? He hurt me. He hurt me in many ways. He almost killed me.
Right.
Sorry it was Tony Iommi, but I felt the same way as everybody else is feeling that's reading this. Times 100, I felt. Because I was in love with him, and I wanted to marry him. And to find out that he was like that was horrible. It was life altering. And I will never forget the feeling. But can I look back at him and say, he's a great guitar player, he's the Riff Master? Do I love Black Sabbath? Yes, of course. He is the Riff Master. I loved Black Sabbath, still do. you got to separate the music from the personal life.
Right.
And this is an autobiography. This is a tell-all book.
Yeah, and that's also part of the question that I was getting to. When you decided to sit down and do a tell-all book, were you not compelled at all to want to gloss some things over? Because, you're still in the industry, you're still working with some of the same managements and the same promoters and the same bookers, and you got to be on double bills and on festival bills like the Heavy Montreal thing. And a lot of these guys are still out there, and it could be, also, devastating to the business. Was there any of that, or you just really had to get it out there?
Devastating to any business.
Okay.
I don't see it being devastating. Nikki and I have been friends since we were 20, and he's happily married. He has a lovely wife, and I'm sure she knows a lot of, his gallivanting around. And Motley Crue were notorious for it. Am I wrong?
No. In fact, they're trying to put a motion picture together called The Dirt so they can make sure everybody sees it on the biggest screens possible.
Exactly. So, I don't see, Glenn Tipton, I had nothing but good things to say. He's a doll, and the whole band is just wonderful. They're wonderful people. Bon Jovi, he was single. He wasn't married when I was with him, and it was nothing but just childhood goofing around, basically. Young kids goofing around. It's not like it happened yesterday. There were no kids involved. There were no wives involved. So, the New York Post makes it sound like it happened yesterday.
Right. And the name that's mentioned in all of that I find interesting is Aldo Nova, because he actually lived down the street from me for many, many years, and John Bon Jovi would show up at his house unexpectedly. Do you have anything to say about Aldo Nova?
Not really. He was friends with John, probably still is, because they lived so close together. They were buddies growing up, and John and I were buddies growing up. So he was just
guy in the picture there.
A guy in the picture, yeah.
Let me ask you about the business for a woman, because you had Kim Fowley who did certain things. You had Tony Iommi with this. MTV was a little more resistant in playing hard rock female videos compared to playing a Poison video, for example. Was it difficult for you overall to break through in the business? Was it? Did you see some guy friends just get up and get signed, and you go, God, why is it so hard for me here?
No.
No?
No, I never looked at it that way. I never thought, I'm a chick, I can't do this. Why? I'm a chick, that must be why it's so hard. I think it's hard for everybody, hard for anybody, the music industry. Being a female, it works against you because people are always, it's easier to pick on a female. It's easier to pick on somebody who's not supposed to be there. If it was a kid, if it was a little kid, people would be cheering them on, going, oh, yeah, little Benny can do it, come on, little Benny. But if it's a female, it's different, because it was a man's world, And I'm talking about the entertainment industry, was a man's industry. And there's no reason why women can't play guitar. It's just a goddamn guitar.
You're right. It really just is. You've got the Time Capsule tour coming up here, and you've got Hailstorm. You're going to do some dates with Hailstorm. Let's talk a bit about that. There are dates that go through spring. Is there anything coming up for the rest of the year in terms of summer and fall tours?
Yeah, we've got a lot of shows coming up. In the middle of the summer, we're going to be doing some festivals in the United States, in Sweden, and in Belgium. And then we're trying to put together a string of shows with Hailstorm in October along the West Coast. So there will be some West Coast shows, because I know a lot of people are like, "What about us?"
Yeah, you can't miss out on that stuff.
Oh no, we wouldn't think of it.
And if I may, we'll just end on this: the LITA album from '88 spawned some of the biggest hits in your career.
Shit! Yeah, I've got an interview 6 minutes ago. Sorry.
Oh, well, all right. Well, then let's wrap up. Let's just wrap up. And thank you, LITA. Always a pleasure.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Mitch.
Cheers. And there you have it, folks. My interview with guitarist LITA Ford. The new album is called Time Capsule. Do yourself a favor and check that out. Let's get right over to Jennifer Batten, former Michael Jackson guitarist on the Ultimate Guitar Experience Tour with Uli John Roth and Andy Timmons. We talk about the tour, Michael Jackson, and all kinds of things. Without further ado, here is the one, the only, Jennifer Batten. We are speaking with guitarist Jennifer Batten. Pleasure to speak with you, Jennifer.
Well, thanks for the hookup here.
Yeah, so you are on this tour with Uli John Roth and Andy Timmons, the Ultimate Guitar Experience, coming through Montreal and Ottawa in the next couple of weeks. Tell me a little bit about the tour, and then we'll start talking about your career as well.
It's just been a blast. Being on a bus with 12 snoring men. There's some great musicians on stage. I had played with Uli on a couple dates in New Zealand and in Europe, and so he got the idea to bring me along, and in part because I do this film show, so I'm the second set, so it gives the band a break so they're not playing 3 hours straight. And Andy Timmons, I've been a fan of his forever. Very inspiring. They're both really amazing players, so it's we're all firing each other up, I think.
Yeah, and Andy's great. Were you a fan of Uli in his Scorpion days?
Yeah. So it's kind of nice all these years later to connect in this way. And he sounds better than ever, I'll tell you what. Amazing.
Yeah, so let's go back into your career if we can. Let's head back to 1979. You were at the Guitar Institute of Technology in Los Angeles, and you hold the distinction of being the first woman to graduate from the institution. So talk to me about that. How was it going into the GIT, and did you face any kind of people looking at you going, "Hey, what's this lady doing here?"
Well, it was kind of enlightening because all the years I had taken lessons, I started when I was 8 years old, and it never occurred to me that what I wanted to do for a living was an odd thing for a woman until I got to the school and found out I was the only one. So, but it was not an abrasive environment by any stretch. Everybody was there to learn, so it wasn't that big of a deal.
And then you ended up teaching there. Tell me about how that went and getting that job, and who were some of the famous players that went through your classroom?
Gosh, well, the first one that comes to mind is Pete Thorn.
Yeah.
He's doing a lot of stuff out there now. Of course, now that I'm on the, now that I have to cough up names, nothing's coming, but he's very active in the guitar world and does a lot of tours. Chris Cornell, that's probably the biggest name he's played with.
Wow.
Yeah, teaching there, after I graduated, I had a good look at LA and did not want to live there, and I had come from San Diego, so I moved back, and eventually everybody was saying, you gotta go back, LA's the place to be. I mean, long before the internet. So I finally made the move, and after a little while up there, I ended up back at GIT in a teaching position.
Yeah, and Having visited both LA and San Diego, I can tell you that living in San Diego is probably the better choice. I mean, it's heaven on earth. It's the greatest town on earth, if you ask me, quite frankly.
Well, my family moved there in '69 before traffic jams, so to me it's turning into a little LA now with all the people that think the same way as you. God, I want to get out of LA, and San Diego has just a perfect climate. It's a bit cooler than LA, a bit friendlier. But I ended up in LA for 20 years, and now I keep going north. I've been in Portland, Oregon for about 12 years now.
Well, hey, and keep going. You'll be in Vancouver at some point. Let's talk about some of the artists that you've worked with, and I'll start with Jeff Beck. Tell me a little bit about working with Jeff and what he is in terms of a guitarist for you. What's his forte for you as a guitarist?
He's been my guitar hero since I was about 13, 14, discovering him on the radio back when radio would play instrumental music for a short time. And I think before that, I was listening to blues. I would take my allowance and just buy blues records, John Lee Hooker, B.B. King, Lightning Hopkins, and that sort of thing. And Jeff was the first one to open up my ears to a lot of different kinds of music. In fact, he got a record review in Downbeat magazine. That's a jazz magazine. But that record had a lot of different things on it, reggae, funk, all kinds of wonderful sonic candy. And that just set me in a whole new direction. And ever since then, he's been number one for me. And I didn't, in a million years, even have a dream of playing with him. I just wanted an autograph. So I was on the Michael Jackson Bad tour in '87, and when I found out I was going back to England on the next tour, that was my number one goal of the tour, was to meet him and get an autograph. And as it turns out, my first record had just been released when that tour took off, and when I did meet him, I gave him a copy of that record, and as well as a video I had done for Flight of the Bumblebee, where I was covered with bees. The things you do to sell records, right? And I gave that to him because it had just been released as well. And, got my autograph, went on my way, never thought I'd see him again. And he called me a couple months later that he had listened to my record and wanted to do a record together. So, of course, I just peed myself immediately.
Of course,
as
right?
Any guitar player would do.
Yeah, of course.
And as it happened, it was another 5 years later before anything happened. He called me up and said, "Hey, I got this tour of Italy." And by that time, I had done another Jackson tour and had another record out, which he heard. So that, I guess, kind of sealed the deal. And he just had such faith in me without even ever playing with me that he said, "Come on, let's do this tour." And I kind of forced an audition on myself by going to his house and playing the Guitar Shop record, just to make sure he wasn't crazy with his decision there. And because I had something going on in Italy at that time anyway, and just booked a flight to England. And it worked out well. I was out with him for 3 years. We did a couple records, and my ears will never be the same.
I can
in a good
imagine.
way and in a bad way, because it is loud.
And of course, in August, you've got this 50 years of Beck anniversary that's going to be taking place at the Hollywood Bowl. How is that going to be for you? Because, it must be great recognition that you got the invite and that you're going to be there. And tell me about that event and what that's going to mean to you.
Oh, it'll just be fun. It's just going to be a fun reunion. He's going to have a bunch of special guests. I don't know all who he's going to have, but he's had such an amazing career with so many chapters, and his playing has changed so much over the years. Just to have people recognizing him and all the different chapters he's been through, it's just going to be a big love fest, I think.
Yeah, I really think so. 2005, you were on an album, Secondhand Smoke, a tribute to Frank Marino. Frank, of course, is Canadian from the Montreal area. What is it about Frank's playing that attracts you?
Just an endless slew of ideas, very creative soul. And that track that I did, it was interesting because I really got to listen to that over and over to try to get ideas on how to do it in an original way. And the original was with vocals, so I covered it with guitar instrumentally, and just had a ball with it. It was very, very exotic sounding, especially for back then when it was recorded. It's almost world beat influenced.
Yeah, and Frank is fantastic. Now, your last album, Whatever, was in 2007. We're now 2016. When do you see yourself getting back in the studio and making a proper solo album?
You know, people ask me that a lot, and because of the internet and it's so easy to steal music, I'm not motivated. So I'm putting my energies in different places and coming up with new shows. I'm constantly traveling around the world trying to get music together for all these different situations. And last summer in America, I toured for 2 months doing a 4-hour seminar I put together called Self-Empowerment for the Modern Musician, and hope to get that to the point where I can stream it on the internet at some point. Paid streaming, mind you.
Right, of course. In fact, tell me a bit about that, the empowerment thing. What was that show, and what was? I mean, it wasn't just entertainment value, right? There was. I don't want to say a purpose to it, but what was the show?
Well, it's an educational seminar
right.
that I wanted to design after TED Talks, in that I would chunk it down into 20-minute segments on a variety of subjects. I start out by telling people about my career, what I've been through, including all the ass kickings. And, you know, when people go to music school, they have no idea what the real world is like. So I try to enlighten them from my perspective as to what I went through regarding auditions, what it's like to be on the road. There's a segment on travel and brain science, the latest in brain science and how to learn properly. And some of it was motivated by bands I have played with that just don't know what I know as far as learning tunes and getting things accurate. There's software out there now that makes it so easy that there's almost no excuse not to have your stuff together. Especially the last, 3-4 years, I've been doing a lot of stuff in Europe where I fly over and we get 3 to 4 hours to rehearse a 90-minute show with a band, and then you got to go that night. So if people don't really have it down and don't have the music accurate, it's just a drag. So I kind of took that frustration and put it into that segment of the course about the optimal way to learn. Because I think that's an issue with people. When they have a lot of music to learn, they just kind of fluff over it and kind of get it, but not really.
Right.
And that's all levels of players. It's, from mediocre to pros. I've found it everywhere. So I'm passionate about teaching people about that. There's a software called Transcribe, and I've done a couple different tutorials on YouTube about it. That's the way to go. And then I get into subjects like, I call it fuel,
right,
where it's not only being mindful about the fuel that you put into your body as food and drink, but also what you allow into your brain. For instance, if you watch the 11 o'clock news and then go to bed and wonder why you're depressed in the morning, it's because of what you allowed in your brain. So it's kind of a holistic view of the life of a musician. Very exhaustive study.
That study of being precise when you perform and being rigorous in what you're doing, is that something that you learn being on a tour with a Michael Jackson or a Jeff Beck? When there's a hired gun, it's highly competitive, and if you're not good, they'll just get somebody else. Or is that something that you had sort of as a personal point of view of, this is how people should be, and this is my work ethic? Where does that come from?
I think it started at GIT when we learned how to transcribe and write out rhythms properly. And then in real life, it was playing in a cover band. And when you hear something that's a hit record and has had loads of money and thought put into it, there's nothing more irritating than hearing a band that doesn't do it right or hasn't put effort into getting the sounds that are on the record or just getting the melody right. I don't know. I think it's something I've just been sensitive to and expect from people, and especially myself. And I put in, oh, here comes the siren in Reno.
Yeah, we got to love the sirens.
There's no escape from the noise around here.
It's all right. When I was speaking to Andy Timmons last night, we also had sirens. It's part of the energy of these interviews, which is good. Talk to me a little bit about the Michael Jackson gig in the sense that, you really do have to be better than everybody else because, if you go see a Kiss show and Ace Frehley has a bad night, well, they don't just fire Ace because, he's in Kiss, or Slash has a bad... But when you're a hired gun, if you have a bad night, you can't really let yourself have 2 or 3 in a row, right?
Yeah, I mean, somebody like a Michael Jackson and Jeff would expect you to be at your peak at all times.
Of course.
And with Michael, all of his songs were hit records. So, if you fluff somebody, everybody knows it. So you're expected to know the parts, to be funky, and a lot of the energy in firing Tour Up was getting the proper sounds. I mean, even the EQ on the snare in Billie Jean, people know that, whether they realize it or not. When they hear it right, it's a lot more resonant with them than somebody that's just doing a bad cover. So, a lot of detail was put into prepping for that show. Especially the first Jackson tour. We had 2 months rehearsal. It was 1 month with the band by themselves in a room, dancers in another room, singers in another room, and then the second month was we all came together in a big sound stage with Michael. So there was lots of time of prep, as opposed to previously when I was in a cover band, we'd rehearse the song once or twice and then go play it that night.
Right.
Night and day difference.
Yes. So talk to me about being on a tour that is that huge. I mean, he was doing stadiums for the most part.
Yeah.
What's it like for you as a guitarist being in an environment like that? Because, like you just said, it's not just a couple of rehearsals and we're going to play tonight and have a couple of beers on stage. Talk to me about what it's like to be at that level, because it's a level that most of us can just never imagine.
Well, it was a real lesson in the power of rehearsal. I always hear people time to time saying, "Oh, I don't want to be over-rehearsed." I've never been over-rehearsed, because every time you go through a song is another opportunity to make it better. And we did so much rehearsal that by the time we opened in Tokyo to 60,000 people, there was no energy put in to wondering what the next chord is, or when the bridge comes up, or what the next song is. It was all so second nature that you could put 100% of your energy into just performing and giving it your all. So that's something I've tried to carry on. I mean, it's a luxury to have a month to rehearse for anybody.
Right.
But I do put in my homework for sure. I know how many repetitions I need on a tune to feel absolutely comfortable on the day with, whatever sound comes at you, because it can be pretty hit and miss in some venues.
Does it become restrictive, though, at some point as a guitar player, that you can't add a flourish here and there, or you can't just sort of go with the energy of the room and you sort of have to stay in that box? Or is it more comforting that, this is the show and done. We don't have to think about anything else?
Well, you put your energy into the precision of
right.
it.
Okay.
And having said that, I would say I was the lucky one, because I was the only one on the tour that got to improvise. It was different tunes depending on what tour it was. But for instance, Working Day and Night, I could just go, well, I was going to say as long as I wanted, but it was as long as Michael wanted, So I just keep going until he felt like it was time to wrap it up. So that was my outlet on the improv thing. But
right.
It's teamwork. It's everybody's got to have their stuff down. And I would, now that you're saying added flourish here and there, Greg Fellingane's, the musical director, would do that.
Okay.
And it would not disturb anyone, because it was always brilliant.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, I do want to talk about the one experience of the Super Bowl 1993. I mean, most of us just dream that we can just watch it on TV, much less play at it or even perform at it. What's that experience like from the moment you show up at the venue, and how does the NFL run you through it? How do you prepare? You got 1 billion people watching you. What is that like?
That was one of the most exciting things that we did, in part because we knew it was a one-off thing. We knew there was 1.5 billion people watching, and honestly, that's the only time I ever saw Michael nervous, because there was so much pressure on him. It was unbelievable. If anything goes wrong, it's live, and that's it forever. I think, gosh, it's been so long now. I would say we did at least 3 or 4 days of rehearsals for it, including the people that would put the stage together, because you only have the time of a couple potato chip commercials to get that together and have all the pieces locked in on the stage and have the band jump on and ready to go by the time the cameras come back. So rehearsal was a big deal.
Yeah. How much input does the NFL have? Do they send scouts out to rehearsal and say, whoop, you can't wear that, and whoop, you can't do this, that song? Or was the band allowed to sort of visually put together what they wanted, and did they have a musical freedom, or were they really sort of constrained?
I wasn't privy to any decisions
okay.
made by the NFL. They may have just left it to Michael, because everything he does is a hit record, and
right.
He just turned it into a big medley of sorts. And they knew there wasn't going to be any profane language, so there's nothing to watch like a rap show or something. So I don't know. I think they probably said, here's how many minutes you have, make sure it doesn't go over.
Yeah, keep it tight. Jennifer, a great pleasure. So we'll be seeing you in Montreal and Ottawa, and very much looking forward to the show.
All right. Thanks for calling.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
And there you have it, folks. My interview with guitarist Jennifer Batten. The tour is the ultimate guitar experience with Andy Timmons and Uli John Roth. Up front, we had LITA Ford. New album is Time Capsule. Thank you to both ladies, and thank you to you, the fans, listening in and listening to this wonderful interview. Please check me out at Mitch Lafon on Twitter and one-on-one Mitch Lafon on Facebook. Bye for now.